All right, so now as we move into the last discussion of chapter 10 of Steiner's analysis of the Gospel according to Luke, it's a very fascinating chapter. It's probably the best chapter in the book, and I've got a diagram here from Ernst Haeckel's drawings of Embryogenesis. Steiner says at one point, he makes this interesting point that embryogenesis no longer proceeds in the same way that it used to, which was just the male gamete and the female gamete meeting and fusing, but that since the Christ event, a new receptivity to the Christ has been added into the embryo. Not something visible, it's not a visible structure, it's a subtle structure. It appears on the subtle plane as a receptivity to the Christ impulse. Previous initiations in the ancient world took place through the physical body, the etheric body, and the astral body, but not the I, not the ego. And so Christ brings this initiatory possibility through the ego, through implanting this as a seed in the embryo. And he says in the ancient world there were two different types of initiation. His is the third. The first type he compares to Jonah in the belly of the whale, in which an individual would be set aside somewhere for three and a half days, actually, where that person's soul would leave the body and go into the spiritual plane and have visions and return to the body resurrected and become like a prophet or somebody, almost like a shaman, a shamanic initiation ordeal, because Jonah is in the whale's belly for 3.5 days. Also, though, this reminds me of one of the world's oldest stories, Lugobanda, who is the father of Gilgamesh. Not a character you hear that much about, but he was a character, he's the father of Gilgamesh, and he was going on a campaign with his 6 brothers, he was the 7th, to Arata, and he falls sick for some reason, some mysterious reason, and the brothers are pretty sure that he's going to die, so they put him inside of a cave, and they leave some food and stuff for him, and they say goodbye. It's a little bit like Joseph's brothers throwing him down into the well to get rid of him. So they leave, and he's in this cave for 3.5 days, lying there, and the cave is perfectly aligned with the moon god, Nanasene, and also, especially with Venus, Inanna, and the sun. And these planets, as they shine into the cave, resurrect him after 3.5 days. And then he goes and he finds the Anzu bird, and the Anzu bird protects him, basically. So, very, very similar here. And Christ, of course, the whole process is 3 days. Your Good Friday, the harrowing of hell on Saturday, and the resurrection on Easter Sunday. The second form of ancient initiation was that exemplified by King Solomon. Here he is, who was not put aside into a separate chamber or a separate place. He just received revelations from the spiritual world. They just came to him in flashes. So that's the second type of initiation. So in the first type, Jonah's astral body had to be prepared to receive these initiatory visions. In the case of Solomon, it was his etheric body that received this knowledge of the spiritual world. But the third form is Christ's transfiguration on the mount with Peter, James, and John, whom he takes up, and he reveals himself as the day Christ, as we've talked about before, the solar Christ, which now democratizes the mysteries. The whole point of the 3 days, and the whole point of the crucifixion, and here's Rembrandt's etching of the crucifixion, one of my favorite etchings of his. The whole point of it was to make the initiatory process public, to democratize the ancient mysteries. That was the whole point of the crucifixion, and to activate it through the I principle, the ego. No longer the astral body, the physical body, or the etheric body, but actually now through the I, as the spiritual forces have been implanted in the embryo through the embryogenetic process to receive the Christ impulse, which will develop, as we saw last time in the last lecture, over the next 3,000 years, until the coming of the Maitreya Buddha. It will gradually develop. Now, I want to recount a story here with regard to the popularization of the ancient mysteries, told by Brian L. Weiss, who is a Yale-trained psychiatrist who practiced hypnotic regression. And in Many Lives, Many Masters, his first book, he accidentally stumbled upon reincarnation by talking to one of his patients. And then she's talking about a previous life as a peasant in Egypt. Just a peasant, a poor woman living in a village in Egypt, and how difficult that was, and so forth. It's like, oh, that's strange. And so he saw her for the next year, and she kept recounting different past lives. And pretty soon he began to realize that, and they started getting other patients too. He began to realize reincarnation is a fact. It's a real thing. Now he tells this one story he was at a conference at the Omega Institute. There was a woman there named Victoria who was a physicist, but she had very severe back problems, and they could not be cured. She was in constant pain. And so he put her under regressive hypnosis. And then so she remembers a time when she was this peasant guy living in the time of Christ. This peasant guy with his family, his wife and kids, very big, strong, burly man, but he liked birds and animals. And so one day he finds a bird. He's in the path on this roadway. He finds this bird with a broken wing, and he's looking at it. And this group of Romans are marching forward, and the lead centurion viciously kicks him in the back. And then they burn down his house and his wife and children, and then continue marching. Totally needless cruelty. And so he's got this broken back, and it never does heal. And so he's sort of limping around, going through life. And he hears this rabbi that's famous for his lectures and sermons, and he realizes that he hears the Sermon on the Mount that Christ gave. He doesn't really know much about this guy or who he is, but the next time he sees him, Christ meets his gaze, and he's there, this broken down old peasant, and the others shun him. The other people in the crowd shun him, but Christ meets his gaze with a compassionate look. And then so the next time he sees him, Christ is dragging this wooden beam toward his death. And the peasant guy realizes he's dehydrated, so he takes this wet cloth, and he tries to reach out and put it in Christ's mouth, but it's too late. He's already gone past. So he witnesses the crucifixion, this guy does. Absolutely amazing. And then after it's over, it's raining, and he's standing under this tree. And all of a sudden he feels this bolt of electricity going down through the crown of his head, straight down his back. And his back is healed. It's straightened out and it's healed. Absolutely incredible story. But then it gets even stranger, because Brian has a story to tell too that he's never told anyone before. Because he doesn't want it to sound like an ego inflation. Brian Weiss in the time of Christ. And hardly ever, I will point out, in all the hundreds of cases that I've read and studied of regressive hypnosis, almost no one claims to have been someone famous or to have known someone famous. Almost no one. It's extremely rare. So Brian says, well, actually, I underwent hypnotic regression myself, and I remembered a past life also living in the time of Christ. I was a very wealthy man living in Alexandria. I had this beautiful robe that I liked to wear and a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard. And I was also a scholar, very proud of myself, very egocentric. And then he was traveling with this guy, this younger guy. He liked to travel a lot through Egypt and through Judea. So he travels with this guy. Later he actually learns that it's Jesus that he's traveling with. He doesn't know anything about him at the time. So they part ways. And so once again, the next time he sees him, he sees the crucifixion. He witnesses it. And the woman, Victoria, Brian's patient, said she looked at him and met his gaze. And she knew it was him because she described his robe. Without Brian having told her anything about what he looked like, she described his robe, the sand-colored robe with this beautiful burgundy inlay in it, and a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard. Brian hadn't told her any of those details. And she said, yeah, we were both there. We witnessed the crucifixion. So there you go. Extremely rare to encounter in these hypnotic regression cases anything having to do with anyone famous. It's extraordinarily rare. So, and Brian Weiss was a Yale-trained psychiatrist. He's not some New Age goofball. So very fascinating. So again, on the theme of the democratization of the mysteries, which is Steiner's whole point here as we finish up the Gospel of Luke, which is a gospel of love. Steiner says that love is the primary message that Luke, and he is a healer, a physician, is trying to convey in this gospel. That Christ's blood, when it hit the ground, tuned the earth's vibrational frequency to one of love, so that love can become available, and that humanity eventually, over many thousands of years, will evolve toward love and compassion, rather than the lower energies, anger, envy, and greed, and so forth. So, very beautiful finish to this book, the Gospel of Luke. So we'll end there and then move on to Steiner's analysis of the Gospel of John.